Funding for Market Journal is provided by the Nebraska Soybean Board.
Whether it's spring planting, fall harvesting, or just a drive across the state, soy biodiesel helps a diesel-powered engine operate in a demanding job. Soybean oil from Nebraska soybeans makes biodiesel a renewable fuel that's also environmentally responsible. The soybean checkoff plays a major role in supporting the use and availability of biodiesel. The Nebraska Soybean Board, growing opportunity from the ground up.
Market Journal, television for agricultural business decisions, is a presentation of the University of Nebraska-Lincoln's Institute of Agriculture and Natural Resources. Promotional support is provided by the Nebraska Farmer magazine, and major funding for Market Journal is provided by the Nebraska Soybean Board. The Soybean Checkoff, growing opportunity from the ground up.
Welcome to this week's edition of Market Journal. I'm Jeff Wilkerson. On this episode, Frayne Olson analyzes the October crop report. Dave Aiken updates us on the continuing conflict over the Republican River Compact. Dave Goeller talks about the increase in Nebraska's beginning farmer numbers. And John Hay provides an overview of the biodiesel industry. North Dakota State Extension economist Frayne Olson is our marketing analyst this week. The USDA's October crop report shows an increase in the agency's expectations for this year's corn and soybean harvest. It's projecting records for production and yield in both crops. If current numbers are realized, Nebraska would be the third largest corn producing state and finish fifth highest in soybeans. As a whole, the country is well behind in harvest progress according to the latest USDA progress report. U.S. farmers are 19 points back of the 5-year harvest average in corn and 13 points off the norm in soybeans. We talked with Frayne Thursday morning about harvest progress, the U.S. stock market, and his thoughts on the October crop report.
It was relatively neutral, to be very honest with you. The USDA numbers came in very similar to what the private estimates were. A lot of the private analysts put out their best estimates of what they think the numbers are going to be, usually about a week ahead of time. So the USDA numbers came in very, very close to what the private numbers were. And actually, given all the possible changes that could have occurred, it was a relatively neutral report.
Your reaction to the slow rate of harvest we've seen so far?
Yeah, that is, we are behind on both corn and soybean harvest. Again, not dramatically behind. The rain showers have been coming through the central part of the U.S. have slowed that down. It's something the market is watching. Nobody's really concerned at this point about the delays. Again, there's the expectation for this massive crop coming in, and the Eastern Corn Belt is sure verifying those numbers.
So we've seen a small rally in corn and soybeans, but I think the question for many farmers as they're out in the field is, can it continue, or have we found a bottom?
Well, I mean, the good news is at least it's not going down anymore. The open-ended question now is, have we seen the harvest lows? There's obviously a lot of debate about that. I guess in my personal view, I think we are either at the lows or have seen the lows already. Although I don't expect any major bounce. We're still, again, relatively early into harvest. My expectation is that we're going to see prices bounce around kind of at these levels until we get through the end of harvest. So my guess is for the next couple of weeks we're going to be in a pretty tight trading range, unless, of course, there's something unexpected on the national and international front.
Where does that rally come from, Frayne? I mean, it seems like the market is expecting that there are going to be huge crops of both corn and soybeans. What kind of thing does it take to really give fuel to either one of these markets?
Well, the market is, the grain market in particular is got a history of the pendulum swinging a little bit too far on the upside and sometimes a little too far on the downside. And I think coming into harvest, there was a lot of negative news. There was a lot of expectations about super large yields. There's a few of the private analysts that were coming out some extremely large yield forecasts. And again, some of those numbers were confirmed with the early yields that were coming in. But as we get into the central and northern corn belt for both corn and soybean yields, I think we're starting to see they're good, but they're starting to moderate a little bit. And so some of those really large numbers that the market was looking at really aren't going to be able to be achieved. So I think there was a little bit of an overreaction early on, and now that we get into the heart of harvest and we're getting some better yield reports, we're realizing it's a large crop without a doubt, but not as large as we had anticipated earlier.
The U.S. stock market has not been doing so well as of late, Frayne. Is there any spillover, or I guess how much spillover is there between the overall U.S. stock market and ag commodities?
Well, and that's a great question, because as we've seen the commodity markets, in particular grains, start to retrace now and prices come down, the interest in a lot of the fund investors, those folks that are constantly shifting between the stock market and outside investments and the grain markets, have gone away from the grains to some degree and into some of the more active markets like the stock market. We're starting to see now, as the stock market begins to fall, they're taking some of their money back out of that and putting them back into commodities. Oil prices have been retracing, so it looks like the grain market might be a better place to be putting some of those monies. And we're starting to see some of that reinvestment of the funds come into the market. Going into harvest, there were many concerns about rail availability. You're in the heart of it there in North Dakota. Have there been problems? Well, so far, again, just to retrace and to give people a perspective, we had some pretty severe problems last winter. We had a lot of concerns. The backlog of cars and deliveries were cleaned up significantly as we moved into midsummer. Now as we get into harvest, we're starting to see those backlog in cars begin to grow again, but that was really anticipated, to be very honest with you. Given the size of the crop, it's going to be extremely difficult to get all this grain moved. Is there a backlog now? There is, and the backlog is starting to grow. And again, in North Dakota, we tend to be the center of the bullseye on that, and so our backlog of cars is starting to grow again based on the current reports. Next week, Jeff Peterson from Heartland Farm Partners will join us to analyze corn and soybean markets. The Republican River Compact was signed in the 1940s by Kansas, Nebraska, and Colorado with the goal of efficiently using water from the Republican River Basin. If you irrigate your crops along its stretch in southwest and south central Nebraska, you know the Republican River has been a source of contention between Kansas and Nebraska. On Tuesday, the U.S. Supreme Court heard legal arguments over a decision made by a special master on the Republican River Compact. We discussed the case with UNL Extension water and ag law specialist Dave Aiken Thursday morning.
Nebraska used more water than it was supposed to in the 2005 and 2006 irrigation seasons. Kansas protested this, and the case ultimately ended up with a special master, and the special master awarded Kansas $5.5 million, and both states have appealed to the Supreme Court.
So why did Kansas appeal in this case?
Well, Kansas wanted a lot more money for Nebraska's overuse. They wanted, tens of millions of dollars and got only a small fraction of that.
What about Nebraska? Why did they appeal?
Well, Nebraska actually has come out of this pretty well, so they're not all that unhappy with what happened. But Nebraska did argue before the court that the $1.5 million that in special damages that the special master awarded Kansas should not have been awarded, and that Nebraska could win on that argument, and also that we should get credit for the groundwater flow coming from the Platte River Basin into the Republican.
What's the federal government's position on this?
The Obama administration supports the special master's decision as is. They said they got it right, and let's just stick with it.
So the hearing was this week. What do you think is going to happen?
Well, actually, I think the Supreme Court is likely to just go with what the special master did. I don't think Kansas has a strong argument for more money. We've got a good argument in terms of we should get credit for the groundwater from the Platte Basin, but we won't know how this turns out till next summer probably.
You say there's more to it here. What's the rest of the story in your opinion?
Well, earlier in this process, Nebraska got an adverse ruling on being in violation, and that was kind of a wake-up call to the NRDs. They agreed to cut off wells near the river in dry years, and that was a big change in terms of administration for Nebraska, and that would have kept Nebraska in compliance in the past and should keep us in compliance down the road.
For farmers that use this water, will there be any changes?
There shouldn't be. The NRDs have gone for the Lincoln County project, where they've retired lots of irrigated acres and would pump the groundwater into the Republican River so that there's always plenty of water for Kansas when there needs to be. And if that project works the way it's supposed to, we should be able to continue with full irrigation from here on out.
If Nebraska is ordered to pay money to Kansas, the money will come from the state. We'll update you on the conclusion of this case when the Supreme Court makes its ruling. The 2012 Census of Agriculture showed the average principal farm or ranch operator in Nebraska was 55.7 years old. But when broken down by age range, the largest group, about 14,000 of the state's nearly 50,000 farmers and ranchers, was in the 55 to 64 age category. Dave Goeller is a farm and ranch transition specialist who recently wrote an article for Cornhusker Economics here at UNL detailing the demographics of Nebraska's principal operators. As you'll hear, while some numbers have held course, one unusual group showed growth in the latest survey.
Well, by age is what we're looking at in this particular study. And the older group, the over 65 group, has continued to increase every year that we've done this ag census. The USDA does an ag census every 5 years, and it's continued to increase almost every year since as far back as I go, which is 1982 is when I started paying attention to this.
Now, since 1982, there has been one number that's been declining, and that's farmers under 35. That changed in this latest census.
It has been, and it's gone down every year, in fact, quite significantly until this 2012 census, when it jumped by 1,300 and some farms, which was pretty significant for that age group, I think. And I wish I knew the reason why specifically, but it has gone up, which is encouraging.
Do you have any opinions on maybe why? I mean, there has to be some thought as to what could be behind this jump.
Sure. Well, I think some of the things that have contributed to the increase in our beginning farmer operators is we have a beginning farmer tax credit program in Nebraska that pays existing farm owners of agricultural resources. It gives them a tax credit to rent to a beginner rather than someone that's already established, so they can rent their land or their machinery or their breeding livestock, whatever it might be. And I think that's been an incentive. I know we've received a couple of grants at the university, received one, and then Legal Aid in Nebraska received one to work with beginning farmers to help them find a way to come back into farming. I think that's been successful. I know we have probably amongst the top one or two most aggressive farm service agency loan operations in the United States. Very, very good group to work with for beginners. They provide low interest loans, sometimes 1.5% interest loans to beginners to help them get started. The TIP program has been there, which helps people that have had CRP programs. They can kind of get an extra payment if they rent to a beginner rather than taking the land out of CRP. So there's been several programs that have been available. Most of those, not all, but many of those have been available in other states, but our neighboring states haven't seen quite the increase, and some of them actually have gone down in beginning farmers.
Do you believe that the push to organic and the push to local farming has also played a role in seeing more beginning farmers?
I think it has. I think the natural area where beginners are able to get started, of course, is that where they can bring their labor and not a lot of capital, which is what they have. And that would be the less inputs, like the organic, the truck garden type of farming. The other thing I think that's probably factored in here is we've just come through probably 5 or 6 of the most profitable farming years in the history of agriculture, especially in the row crop areas. And I know when I speak to a group of young agronomy students or something, a lot of hands go up in the audience as to who wants to come back to farm. And I think the possibility of making a good living has really contributed too.
This jump, this 42% jump, however, was an outlier compared to other Midwestern states, right?
It was. The next highest one was South Dakota, and they were about 22% increase. Iowa actually went down. Kansas was exactly equal. Colorado went up 6%. Minnesota went down 4%. Illinois went up 8%. Nebraska went up 42%. So I think it's significant. I don't know exactly why, but I think it's significant. I'm happy to see it.
You close out your article in this Cornhusker Economics writing by saying that the agriculture is important and the health of rural communities depends on it. Expand on that.
Well, I think if we don't have beginning operators and younger operators coming into our communities, what happens is that we end up with more and more consolidation. The biggest owner down the street is the one that's likely going to come in and take over the business. And the impact on that is that we have probably one less family in the community, we have one less family sending kids to school, we have one less family sitting in the church pews. So I think that it benefits our entire community if we can add younger people back into our communities.
On the Market Journal website, we'll link to Dave's recent Cornhusker Economics article. We'll also link to information on the Nebraska Department of Ag's Next Gen program. One aspect of that program features the personal property tax exemption for beginning farmers, which has a deadline of November 1st. Late last year, the EPA announced proposed changes to the Renewable Fuel Standard, or RFS. The agency suggested lowering the blending requirement of corn ethanol from 14.4 billion gallons a year to just more than 13 billion gallons per year. Its biomass-based diesel target would remain unchanged under the plan at 1.28 billion gallons for both 2014 and 2015. The proposal is still unapproved, but would lower total renewable fuel requirements by about 3 billion gallons. However, Secretary of Ag Tom Vilsack has said he expects the final numbers will be larger than the initial request. We've told you before that Nebraska plays a large role in ethanol as the nation's #2 producer. The state's soybean farmers produce a crop that can be incorporated into another fuel in the form of biodiesel. We recently talked with UNL Extension educator John Hay about the biodiesel industry and its status under the RFS.
The Renewable Fuel Standard today is kind of a year back. We have a requirement to blend a certain amount of biofuels into our petroleum transportation fuels. And every year, the EPA has set out the plans for the next year. And their 2014 plan has yet to be reported to us. And what's interesting about 2014 was that the EPA suggested a change in the RFS blending requirement that wasn't really all that expected, a reduction in the amount of corn ethanol to be blended, and some other reductions based on the fact that there's not a lot of cellulosic fuels and things out there. Now, the reality is, what are those numbers going to be? We don't know. Those numbers are still waiting to come out. It's going to be really interesting, and obviously biodiesel has a piece of that.
We've talked on this show before about the renewable identification numbers and the market for those almost separate, but what do they relate to, or how do they relate to biodiesel?
Yeah, the RINs, or the renewable identification numbers, are really an important piece to this whole thing because it's how the RFS tracks the blending. And so every gallon of biofuel that comes out gets a renewable identification number, and then that number follows it through to be blended. And that number has value, and it has value because if a required obligated party that's supposed to blend biofuel doesn't blend, then it has to buy a RIN number or a RIN credit from someone else, and so those have some trading value, and that trading value influences the price of those fuels. And so the RIN values are based somewhat on the BTU content of the fuel. So a biodiesel RIN has about 1.5 times the value of an ethanol RIN. And so a biodiesel gallon gets 1.5 RINs, and a biodiesel RIN today is worth about 50 cents.
Now there is not currently a blender's credit for biodiesel, correct?
There's not. The blender's credit is a subsidy that was $1 a gallon. It expired at the end of last year, and it hasn't been renewed, though there is talk that they're going to bring it up in the lame duck session coming up. We'll see what happens. If it does come up, it may come up and be retroactive to the year 2014, and then maybe go on 1 year into the end of 2015. We'll see what happens.
Tell me where the feedstocks are coming from for this.
Feedstocks on biodiesel have changed a little bit over time. One thing that hasn't changed is the predominance of soybean oil. Soybean oil is still the preferred product for that. It's very ubiquitous. There's a lot of it out there. But the access to distillers grains oil, or oil that's pulled off of distillers grains in the ethanol plant, is becoming more available. And the prices of that have been competitive, and they can get that and use it for biodiesel. Also, animal fats are still pretty common. So those are the three major feedstocks for biodiesel. And again, biodiesel plants are selecting their cheapest feedstock, and a lot of them are making it out of whatever they can get at the lowest price at the time. So as competition for one thing changes, they'll just buy something else.
You believe that the quality of biodiesel has increased or has gotten better, right?
I really do. I really see that the industry has worked very hard to make that quality better. There was a time, not that many years ago, where biodiesel, there were some question marks on quality. In particular, the question marks on quality were in the gel point, or the point at which you plug up filters because of the cold temperatures. And animal fat biodiesel has a very high gel point, and then soybean biodiesel is still slightly higher than petroleum diesel, so that was a question mark. But the industry has really ramped up its patrol of those types of issues, as well as putting standards in place like the BQ 9000, and so the quality is much better than it was, and the industry really ramped up and did that themselves.
What about the economics? Is it profitable right now?
You know, the economics are interesting because it changes over time. You know, for the longest time, biodiesel was more expensive than diesel fuel because the feedstocks were pretty expensive, and making it, you add all that up, and it was more expensive than diesel fuel. But today, it's really pretty close because of lower feedstock costs, because of lower costs of production. And then finally, this RIN value, which again, it's a 50-cent RIN, and it's not quite exactly worth 50 cents if we add it into the whole thing, but it makes a big difference. And that 50-cent RIN is the difference now, and today, biodiesel is probably lower cost than regular diesel, and so what the oil industry has done, or what the diesel industry has done, is it's blending some into a majority or a lot of our fuels. So a lot of the fuel we use today, you go to the regular diesel pump and you fill diesel, there might be 1% to 2% biodiesel in that fuel. And they are able to do that because the fuel is not substantially different, still meets ASTM regs, and they say that they don't have to label unless it's over 5%.
We'll update you on new RFS numbers when they're finalized. The nation's oldest continuously operated federal tree nursery is in Nebraska, and it provides millions of seedlings that Nebraska's 23 natural resources districts distribute each year. The story of the Charles E. Bessey Tree Nursery near Halsey is told in the October Nebraska Farmer. Bessey's nursery manager Richard Gilbert says the nursery has been producing plants since 1902 to help protect natural resources, livestock, cropland, and wildlife. The nursery raises between 1.3 and 1.5 million bare root trees on 46 irrigated acres. In addition to the NRDs, trees also go to reforestation efforts in Colorado, Wyoming, and South Dakota. You can read more about the nursery's efforts in the October Nebraska Farmer. Now, with this week's weather forecast, here's UNL Extension State climatologist Al Dutcher.
Well, folks, here we are again for the weekly forecast. During this past week, the only sensible weather that we had to deal with was a system that moved through on Sunday and into the Monday time frame, and it primarily impacted south central through east central Nebraska, with the heaviest precipitation totals located across extreme southeastern Nebraska. The further northwest you move from this area, the less you've seen in precipitation. In fact, many areas of the western half of the state went precipitation free, which was actually a benefit in terms of harvest activity, as we are behind normal for this time of the year. Now, the NASS statistic reports that came out on Tuesday morning that reflects the data through Monday, because it was the holiday, essentially was indicating that 90% of the corn crop in Nebraska was harvested and 45% of the soybean crop. With this good weather that we've had during this week, I suspect that these totals are going to ramp up rather dramatically as we go into next week's release, which will come out on Tuesday or Monday afternoon into Tuesday morning, and I suspect that we'll see soybean harvest breaching the 80% mark, if not even approaching the 90% mark. Corn, I think, will be very fortunate if we get another 10% jump on the ratings, but I expect that that'll start to improve based on the weather next week. We expect that excellent harvest activity holds all the way through at least the midweek period, and the only fly in the ointment is another system that may impact eastern Nebraska. So let's take a look at the upper air models and see how this week's going to progress. Here's the upper air trough that is situated over the eastern United States, and in its wake we do have a high pressure ridge building in. There is a slight little weak wave moving through. This doesn't have any moisture associated with it, so we're expecting nothing but a few clouds and a little bit of cooler than normal conditions by a few degrees, but we'll start to see the warm-up start to take place tomorrow as this ridge starts to build up toward the northern plains, we'll see that cool conditions start to release its grip over the Great Lakes region, so we'll be looking at temperatures getting more seasonable across the western part of the state, with just slightly below normal across northeast Nebraska. Now as we go into Monday, we'll see this ridge firmly establish itself, so this is great harvest activity weather across the midsection of the country, and it looks like this is going to be pretty much a status quo feature for the next couple days. As we go into Tuesday, we just see the ridge starting to slip just a little bit toward the east-southeast. That's going to put us on the backside of this high pressure ridge, much warmer conditions move in. Easily everybody in the state should be in the 70-degree range, with some isolated 80-degree readings across the western one-third of the state possible. Now as we get into Wednesday, this ridge starts to even move farther toward the east. We have a little wave moving across the northern plains, and so we're going to get that southwesterly flow ahead of this system, and everybody should be in the 70s with a few 80s across western Nebraska. And as we get into Thursday, the system starts to drive toward the southeast, and right now the main precipitation band looks to be across eastern Nebraska, and at this point it doesn't look like much in the way of significant moisture, although this could change. And as we get into Friday, the system passes toward our southeast, and high pressure system builds back in. So if we look at the temperature forecast, we'll see that we have a warming trend through the middle of the week before a slight cool down with that system coming in. In terms of the 8 to 14 day forecast, with that ridge building back in, warmer than normal conditions are expected. And as we see precipitation above normal, that is reflecting another system coming in toward the last full week of the month.
Thanks, Al. Today's interviews can be found on the Market Journal website and through the Market Journal mobile app. They include information on market analysis, the Republican River Compact, beginning farmers in Nebraska, and the biodiesel industry. You can keep track of Market Journal during the week by following us on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. And in addition to our weekend broadcasts, Market Journal can now be seen on Mondays at 12:30 on NET2. Next week, Jeff Peterson will be our market analyst, and Brad Lubin will join us to talk about Farm Bill options. Until then, thanks for watching. I'm Jeff Wilkerson. We'll see you next week.
Join Market Journal online at marketjournal.unl.edu. You can also follow us on Facebook and Twitter. Promotional support is provided by the Nebraska Farmer Magazine. Funding for Market Journal is provided by the Nebraska Soybean Board. The Soybean Checkoff, growing opportunity from the ground up. Market Journal is produced by the University of Nebraska-Lincoln's Institute of Agriculture and Natural Resources. Funding for Market Journal is provided by the Nebraska Soybean Board.
No matter how you look at it, animal agriculture helps Nebraska's economy. The livestock industry provides increased tax revenues for schools and community services. Livestock enterprises also create jobs while contributing to existing businesses such as local banks and grocery stores. A thriving livestock industry helps maintain our current way of life, but also provides opportunities for the next generation of farm families. The Nebraska Soybean Checkoff helps to raise awareness of the importance of animal agriculture to Nebraska.